right. Well, good evening. So good to be with you guys tonight. If you are new with us, this is your first time or first time back in a while, we're so glad that you're here. My name is Chad Kincer, and I serve as one of our pastors at the 5 and 7 o'clock services here at the Austin Stone. Real pleasure to be with you tonight and to share from God's Word with you. If you have a Bible, go ahead and open up to Exodus chapter 33. Exodus chapter 33, we're continuing forward in our journey through the book of Exodus. We've been here for quite some time. I was thinking about it. We started Exodus this time last year. So it's kind of been quite the journey for us. But we're going to finish this thing, God willing, at Christmas time. And so we're moving toward the end, but we're here right smack dab in the middle of the narrative in chapter 33 tonight. And it's been such a good journey for us. If you've been sort of tuned in the entire time we've walked through this, the idea is that we see our own story of salvation. We understand more of our own rescue and what God's done to us, what's happened to us in God, as we see the way He's rescued and what's happened to Israel. We understand our story by better understanding their story and how God is shaping us. One of the ways, I love to say it, what God has done to me. If you've been saved for any length of time, you know that something has happened to you. You're a different person, and that's kind of what we see happening through the narrative of Exodus. We understand what God has done to us. And so where we left off last week in chapter 32 is we captured we just talked about one of the most popular narratives of Scripture that's captured in the book of Exodus in the way that God's people rebel against Him to worship the golden calf. Even if you don't have much time in Exodus, maybe you've heard of the way that God's people worshiped a golden calf at one point in their history. And so we talked about that narrative in the way that it's such a wild story of their irrational rebellion. But one of the things we talked about last week is that as we think about our own rebellion against God, as we think about our own ways of wandering from God, our rebellion is just as irrational. So it's not as though as we read their story of worshiping a golden calf that now, here in 2016, we've evolved some way beyond that. We find ourselves now as a more faithful people. It may not be that you're worshiping a golden calf or you're running to that as a God of your own making, but it's just something else. It may not be that, but it's just something else, and you and I are just as irrational. But what we talked about last week was the way that God responds to His people with patience and with forgiveness, and that helps us understand the very same way that He's the same God today as He was then, responding to you and I in our own irrational rebellion with patience and forgiveness. So that was last week, and so this week we're jumping into the kind of continued narrative in chapter 33. And so if you've got a Bible, open there. I want to begin by reading the first 3 verses. If you don't have a Bible, the words will be on the screen behind me. But we'll start by reading verses 1 through 3, and then we'll jump in from there. Exodus 33, verse 1, the word of Christ speaks like this. The Lord said to Moses, "Depart and go up from here, you and the people whom you have brought out of the land of Egypt, to the land which I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, to your offspring I will give it. I will send an angel before you, and I will drive out the Canaanites, the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, and go up to a land flowing with milk and honey. But I will not go up with you, lest I consume you on the way, for you are a stiff-necked people." This past week, I was taking some time looking through some old photos on my computer. I'm not even sure how I started looking through my photo library. I just did, and I was kind of clicking through these photos. And I started coming on some pictures that were kind of captured in my college days of my wife and I, almost now 10 years ago. Don't judge me for how old I am, but I was looking at these pictures and thinking, oh my gosh, like there are a crazy number of pictures that I have forgotten about entirely. Like these moments in my life that have happened and these people in my life that were so significant. As I think about what was happening in my life then, I'm finding these pictures and these moments. I'm like, that was unbelievably formative to me, and I'm not living like I've almost forgotten about it altogether. They didn't even happen. And so I kind of thought, man, this is crazy. Things that have happened and pictures that are there that I didn't even know existed. And so I was kind of struck as I was looking through this by a couple of things. Number one, just how ridiculous I looked 10 years ago. My hair was stupid, and I could not believe as I looked back, I'm like, what was I even doing with that haircut? I thought about showing a couple of these pictures, but I thought, if I do that, I'm going to lose credibility through the rest of the sermon. So I just hope you like my hair now, if that's okay. But I thought, first of all, I looked ridiculous, and the fact that I found a wife with that haircut is a miracle, and it can happen for you too. Living testimony, right? The second thing was I was just kind of despaired. as I saw these pictures, because I thought, I have forgotten about people and about these moments that have made me the man I am today. And I was like, I got to start calling people. I got to write some letters and stuff to say, I've forgotten about you. Sorry, I'm a bad friend. P.S. Forgive me, you know? I just, man, it's like life has happened. Life has moved on. And things that meant so much, I've just kind of almost forgotten about. Maybe you know something of this, right? Like there are moments where life happens, you just start carrying on, and there were things that happened in your background that you might get around some old friends, start telling stories, and you're going, oh yeah, that did happen. Maybe you know something of this. I think the plague of forgetfulness is something that happens kind of to all of us. It happens certainly in things like this, things of past events, past moments, past relationships. It happens in things like, I forgot to grab that at the grocery store, and now I'm frustrated because I might have to go back. Like, forgetfulness kind of plagues us. But it's not just in those things. As I kind of thought about my own forgetfulness weeks, I was even reminded of studying this sermon, the ways I'm forgetful of my own life with God at times. Right? So maybe you can relate to that. As we look through this narrative in Exodus and we think through what's happening with Israel, what's really easy for you and I to do is to read this story and go, man, if I had experienced what Israel had experienced, if I saw the plagues the way Israel saw the plagues wipe out a nation, if I saw the Red Sea parted and I'm walking through with me and my friends and my tribe mates kind of on dry ground with fish and other things all around me, so I'm looking at the seas parted, if I had experienced that like they experienced that, then I would not have forgotten God in the same way that they were so quick to forget God. Like it's easy for us to kind of read back into that going, these people are crazy. Surely I would have responded better than them. Surely I would have not forgotten so quickly and not wandered so swiftly, right? It's a temptation for us. And yet, here's what's more true. In the room tonight, there are those of you who are following Jesus, and the Red Sea has been split for you, so to speak, in very real ways in your life. Think about the way that for some of you, you consider how God has saved you and the things he did, the kind of series of events he set in motion to lead you to eventually seeing him, understanding him, and wanting to follow him, the ways God has protected you and kept you and saved you. He's done miraculous things for you, for me. There are ways where some of you are able to think about where you once were, and now you see where you are, and you go, God has brought me a tremendous long way. Like God has done amazing things in my life. And so you're able to see what God has done for you. You're able to see the way God has moved in you. There's been moments in your life, maybe if you follow Jesus, where you've gone, God's presence has been so tangible at different points in my life that I have hardly known what to do with myself. And yet, in the midst of all of that, there are also these moments where maybe you're there right now, or maybe you've been there before, where all of that has happened. God has done all of that for you, yet your heart still grows cold. Your heart still grows callous to God. And there are times and there are seasons where it feels like his distance is such that you wouldn't even recognize him if he walked into the room. You're going, he's done all of these things, yet my heart still grows callous. And so I think for any who've walked with Jesus any length of time, there has to be an honesty about us that when we look at Israel, it's not how could they do that, because we recognized, oh yeah, I've done that. Me too. I've been there. Like there are moments, right, where maybe you've had such an experience with God, such a tangible expression of his own presence in your life that you would then be led to say something like, God, I'll never doubt again. I'll never go back and do that thing again. God, I'll never wander from you in those ways again. And then what happens? Maybe sometimes it's just even moments later. Or maybe it's a couple of days later, weeks later, months later, and you find yourself doing what? Doubting again? Wandering away from him again in the ways you said you wouldn't, or doing that thing again you said you would never do again. And so any honest look at Israel would cause the genuine believer in Jesus to say, I absolutely get that. I absolutely get that. And that's totally me. That's totally me. And so as we open up Exodus 33 tonight, I want us to kind of get to the bottom of a few questions. So for forgetful people like you and I, for people who often forget the goodness and the greatness of God in our own life, for people like you and me, where is there hope for us? Is there hope for us in the midst of our forgetfulness? Is there a way forward? Is there a way where we can begin to wander less or stop wandering at all? What is the hope for us amidst our own forgetfulness? And so as we pick up in Exodus 33 tonight, we're actually doing so right where we left off last week. If you remember, again, this was all about a broader conversation that God was having with Moses, where he had gotten angry at Israel for bailing on him so quickly to worship that golden calf. God was angry at their rebellion and saying, I'm going to consume them, I'm going to destroy them. And Moses prays on behalf of the people to God to say, no, don't do that. Remember your promise to us. And God says, oh yeah, I remember my promise. And so he relents. And this is where we pick up in Exodus 33. The conversation is still moving, and God's now going to make Israel an offer. He's relented. He's not going to consume them. And now he's going to speak Moses to say, I have an offer for you with Israel. Look at it again in verses 1 through 3. It says this. The Lord said to Moses, depart and go up from here, you and the people whom you brought out of the land of Egypt, to the land which I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, saying to the offspring that I will give it. I will send an angel before you. I will drive out the Canaanites, the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. I always love pronouncing those names together. Verse 3, and God says this, go up to the land flowing with milk and honey, but I will not go up among you. I will not go up among you, lest I consume you on the way, for you are a stiff-necked people. So did you hear the offer that God just made Israel? He just said, my holiness and your sinfulness can't coexist. If we go together, you're going to keep trampling on my mercy, and because of my righteousness, I will consume you, so we can't go together. But here's what I'll do for you, Israel. Here's the offer on the table. I'll give to you what I said I was going to give to you. But I'm not going. I'm not going. So I'm going to make good on my promise to give you the land that I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. I'll give you the land, but I'm not going. So the offer on the table is God saying to them, I'm going to give you military success. Every enemy that stands in your way that would keep you from inheriting the land that I promised you, you're going to blow them down. Like they're not even going to stand against you in a way that's difficult for you. I'll give you military success and give you the land. Not only that, I'll give you monetary success. You're going to a land flowing with milk and honey. That sounds awesome, right? Endless milk. And just honey, just honey. Natural stuff in case you're clean, you know? Just endless amounts of it. Now, what that means is God's saying there's just resources galore. Milk stands for kind of sustenance, like it's going to keep you going in life. Honey is sweetness and pleasure and leisure. So he's saying there's a land flowing with everything you could ever want. Monetary success, resources that are endless for you, I'll give it to you. But I'll also give you health and wealth and prosperity. You're going to go in the land and you're going to prosper. The only thing is, I'm not going with you. My presence is not going to go with you. The relationship you have with me is going to be no more. Now listen. What if God were to offer you the very same thing? What if God were to make the same offer to you? How would you respond? I'll give you everything you've ever dreamed of. The future marriage you've wanted with the wonderful children, or some of you are like, I'm single, I don't want to be married, I don't want kids. God's like, okay, I'll give you that too. Just however you imagine it. Everything you've ever wanted. I'll give you health, such that you'll never have to worry about cancer. You'll never have to worry about it. I'll give you the body you've always wanted. You don't have to work out, carb load, and eat all the sugars you want. And you can have it. I'll give you all the money you want. I'll give you all the power you want, control, influence, comfort. I'll give you everything you've ever wanted. But you can't have me. How would you respond? How would you respond to that? I'm just going to be honest. I know in my darkest moments, I think about this scenario. So in case you're in here like, oh, I have to say, no, of course I wouldn't go. I love God. No, be honest. We're not all put together like that. I know, at least I'm not. There are moments I've thought about studying this text going, there are times that sounds like a pretty good offer. And I know there's a lot of people who would hear this and they would say, deal. Deal. No negotiations. And this is exactly the kind of religion that honestly most of us would want, right? Where you get to live with all the benefits of God, all the gifts of God. You get to live with all the health, wealth, and prosperity, and peace and comfort you want. You get to live with all of that. You get to live in a world where the sun is still warm, where the breeze is still cool against your skin. You have all the benefits of God with none of the accountability. And so in case you're going, well, that's just a hypothetical offer. No, that's an actual offer he just made to them in the first 3 verses. This isn't like, make-believe. This is actually what he said to them. A world where you can have all the benefits, but no need to have faith, no need to have obedience, no need to have confession of sin. Would you take it? Would that satisfy you? But look at how Israel responds in verses 4 through 6. It says, when the people heard this disastrous word, they mourned, and no one put on his ornaments. For the Lord has said to Moses, say to the people of Israel, you are a stiff-necked people. If for a single moment I should go up among you, I would consume you. So now take off your ornaments, that I may know what to do with you. Therefore the people of Israel stripped themselves of their ornaments from Mount Horeb onward. And so God just said to them, I'll make you beautiful, I'll make you rich, I'll give you everything you want, but you can't have me. And it says the people heard this as a disastrous word, and they mourned. They heard this as a disastrous word, as a word of absolute horror and fear, and they mourned. Why? Because they were a people who had really experienced God. They were a people who had known deeply the power of the presence of God in their lives, and the thought of having that removed from them brought them to complete ruin. They had known for real the presence of God, and the thought of having that removed, but to have everything else, was complete ruin to them. You see, for the Christian, there is the potential to be the most miserable person on the planet. Very often you would think, no, that's for those who aren't Christians, for the non-believers. They're more miserable than Christians, but that's not necessarily the case. You see, for a Christian who has known God, experienced God, but for whatever reason, maybe you're running from God. You're trying to find your own way. There's something that has happened in your life where you're questioning, you're cynical, you're doubting the faith, and you're trying to find your own way apart from the God whom you've known historically. And so now you find yourself running to things that you used to satisfy. You're trying to find that old rush again, that old thing that gave you meaning, the old thing that made you happy. And you keep pursuing these things only to find yourself frustrated and longing, and they don't work anymore like they used to. And so you might be the most miserable person on the planet because you know God, you've had experience with God, yet you're running to these old things, and you can't enjoy either of them anymore. And so you're stuck in the middle with this internal conflict, and you're exhausted. Because you're trying to hide from God, even though you know you can't. You're trying to find pleasure apart from Him, although you know you can't. And nothing is working, yet you're here in the middle, and you look nice, you have your hair combed over, you have your clothes on, you're smiling, and you tell everyone you're fine, yet you know you're exhausted. And the reason that a non-believer is not so miserable is because they've never known God to come and fill their soul. They've never known opening the scriptures and having a word that jumps off the page into their heart so that it's no longer black ink on a white page, but it's a living word that's now telling them who they are and who God is and what life is about in a way that says, that was written just for me. They've never known that. They've also never known what it's like to have forgiveness of sins and now this weird ability and power to then forgive people who've sinned against you. They've never known that. So one of the ways you know you're a Christian is if you've been running from God for however long, and the ways that you run from Him to pursue things you used to pursue, you do so, yet they come up lacking. That's great evidence. That's great evidence that not those things have changed, but you've changed. That's a great evidence that it's not those things that have changed, but it's that you've changed. God has come into your soul, and He's filled you, and He's given you His presence. Those things, they won't taste the same anymore. They can't. And yet I'll tell you, if you continue to walk in those ways, apart from God, you will continue in your misery. You'll continue in your exhaustion. You'll continue in your conflictedness. Your response is to repent and to return to have God back at the center. And this is exactly what the people of Israel knew. It says that they mourned, and it goes on to say that they took off their ornaments. Now, that's just a phrase that simply means they refused to dress themselves up anymore to make it look like everything was okay on the outside. They took off the things that made them look like everything was okay. They said, what people think of me and the way I look is no longer a priority. God is the priority. He's gone wrong for me. I need to get that right. I'm off here. And because that's off, everything else is off. So it says they refused to put on their adornments, their ornaments, the way that would dress them up on the outside to say, I've got to get God right or nothing is right. And so maybe some of you are there, even tonight. So maybe you're coming in tonight and recently, whether it be driving home from work, going home from class, or leaving some sort of social setting you were in, and you're running from God and you're thinking to yourself as you're headed home, or I need to get things right with God, but I'll get to that later. Or I need to get things right with God, but I'm just really busy right now. Like, there's just a lot of things going on. I've got midterms. I'm thinking about final projects coming in. I've got different things going on at work. I'm just busy right now. I'll get to that. Or I need to get things right with God. I know I do, but I'm in the season of transition right now. I don't know where I'm going to be in 6 months, so once things kind of level off and stabilize, then I'll deal. Or there's a person in my life that if I start walking with God again, they're not going to like that and they're going to reject me and I'm not going to have that relationship. So I need to figure out now what to do with that person before I start pursuing God so I can have all my ducks in a row. No, listen. It says the people recognize there's no life outside of him. And so there's no time to go on figuring those things out. What you need, if that's you right now, what you need more than anything is to deal with God. Just start honestly crying out to him, saying, I need to have you back at the center. To have all else, but to be without you is to have nothing. That's the response, if that's where you are. And that was the cry of the Israelites. And this was the cry of Moses. Look over at verse 15, look how they said it. It says, and he said to him, Moses said to God, if your presence will not go with me, don't bring us up from here. Don't bring us up from here. So Moses just said to God, listen, if you're not going, I'm not in. To think about having the land but not you is a disastrous word. I need you, God. I need you. And this is the cry of every Christian. Because run as you might to other things, you'll always come back to the place where you realize that to have all else but be without God is meaningless. It's meaningless. This is the cry of every true Christian. And so there may be times in your life where you'll be tempted, as I am at times. There may be times where you'll be tempted to have heaven on earth without God. To have everything you want but not have him. Though that may be tempting at times, but you know there's nothing there. You know there's nothing there and will not satisfy. We've got to keep reading because in verse 17, God's going to give another offer. God's going to come back and he's going to make another offer. Look at it in verse 17. And the Lord said to Moses, the very thing that you have spoken, I will do for you. For you have found favor in my sight, and I know you by name. So God responds, and he says, good, Moses. That's right and good, that kind of response. If I'm not going with you, you're not going. That's good. So I'm going to do what you've asked me to do. I'm going to go with you. I'm going to go with you. And so we hear that, we read that, and we go, okay, so now everything's good, right? Like the sermon's almost over. God's going to go with the people. The land of milk and honey is going to be flowing, and God's going to be with them. I mean, let's get the band back up here. But Moses is about to do something that's going to take this to a different level. Moses is about to say something that's going to take this to a different... I encourage you to go back this week and read Exodus 33. Just read it at one sitting and see how this conversation progresses. Because if you're like me, when I started reading this and studying this week, it was almost like when I came to this point, I started having these indication alarms, these indicator lights kind of going off saying, okay, stop, Moses, stop while you're ahead. Like you have it. Like, shut up and just take what you have and go on, right? It's all good. You're going to have the land, you're going to have God, it's all good. But Moses doesn't stop here. Moses is about to, what he does in the next verse, he's about to just go all in. He's going to push all the chips to the center of the table. He's about to go all in because for Moses, this isn't enough. Look at what he does in verse 18. And so Moses said, "Please show me your glory." Please show me your glory. So when we read this, we ought to read this and absolutely gasp. Because what Moses does is he blows right by any signposts of how you interact with God, what to say and what not to say to God. And what he just said is, no. Having the stuff and having you just kind of riding alongside of us is not enough for me. I want to see you as you are. I want you in your fullness. That's not enough, God. I want more. Now remember, Moses is asking this of the same God who just verses before this in 32 was about to smoke his people for their disobedience. Like there would be moments where you go, hey, your self-awareness, the timing isn't right, Like catch him on a better day, Like there's a different time to kind of ask this question. Good question, just do a different moment. Moses says, no. I want all of him. I want all of him. Show me your glory. And so why is it not enough for Moses to have the land and to have God riding alongside of him? Why is it not enough? You see, because Moses knows that for a man like himself, for a people like Israel, for a people like you and me, a people so prone to forgetfulness, a people so prone to doubt, a people so prone to wonder, the only hope for a people like us is to see and to behold God for who he really is, because there's nothing else that can hold us. There's nothing else that can hold us. Everything else in this life is like cotton candy. It's good for a little while, but then we need more. He's saying, God, we're going to keep living the same old way if we don't have more of you. And the only thing I know to ask is, can you show me your glory? And so here's the point. So why is it not enough? Doesn't that sounds good enough just to have God plus all the stuff? What more could you ask for? Well, Moses understands something, and so do you and I. Because if the desire of our hearts is to have God and something else, so the desire of our hearts is to say, I want God plus something else. I really want God, but I also want some other stuff. If that's where we are, whatever that something else is, whatever it is, it will always live in conflict with the other. It will always live in conflict with the other. Jesus says it this way, you can't serve two masters. Either you'll love the one and you'll hate the other, or you'll hate the one and you'll love the other. You can't serve two masters. So if you have, I want God plus these other things, and that's what's going to satisfy me, you're going to find they're going to always be at conflict, because at some points to have more of God is going to mean to let go of this thing, and to have more of this thing in other moments will mean to let go of God. And so hear me clear. I'm not saying that health, wealth, and prosperity and peace and comfort are bad things. They're not bad things. But here's the tendency of our hearts. All of us know this if we're honest with ourselves. Our tendency is to receive the good gifts of God and become so enamored with the gifts themselves that we'll be so quick to replace God with the gifts and forget the giver altogether. I don't need him anymore. I got what I want. I got what I want. This is us. This is me for sure. There's so many times in life where your problem is mine, and mine is not that we don't want God. We for sure do. The problem is we just don't want him at the center, right? You want God, but you just don't want him you don't want him calling the shots. You don't want him coming to interrupt your plans. You want God, but you're not wanting him to intervene and be at the center. You want God so long as he gives you what you want. Right? So for example, you want God on the night of that breakup with the boyfriend or girlfriend. You want him there to comfort you and to let you know that you're better than that and that you're fine and you're stable and you're comforted. God has a plan for my life, and it's not him. I hate him. Turn on Taylor Swift, right? You want God in that moment. But you didn't want God in the relationship when it came to his input on sexual purity. So you want God when it comes to a well-paying job. God, give me a job. And God, give me kind of an upward trajectory in my career. And, oh, God, yeah, I want you there whenever I need you to remind me that you're going to provide for me after I lost the job. I want God then. But I don't really want God coming along in the midst of that talking to me about generosity. Right? So very often the problem, and there's just two examples. I could give more from my own. Very often the problem isn't that we don't want God. We just want to put parameters on how he can and cannot move and when he can and cannot speak. And so what's the hope for us? For forgetful people like you and I, for people prone to wonder, prone to doubt, prone to put boundaries on God, what's the hope for us? And Moses is saying here, the text is saying here, God is telling us here, seeing and beholding God for all that he is the only thing that can hold us. What you and I need most is for God to break through our own foolishness of wanting other things apart from him to help us see something bigger. That's what we need. What you and I need is for God to cut through our own depravity for wanting God to be something than he actually is at different times in our life to make us feel better about our own way of understanding him. And so to all of this, Moses prays, God, show me your glory. And so what is the glory of God? What is it? I think we need to know what it is if we're going to ask for it. It comes from the Hebrew word kabod. The Hebrew word kabod, where this originates, it means weight. And so what it's saying about God is that the glory of God is the weight, it's the significance, it's the grandeur, it's the wonder of everything that he is. That's what the glory of God is. It's seeing you're significant, you're serious, you're the real deal. You are more than I can even describe or hang on to. That's who you are. And the glory of God is everything that he is. And when you see that bearing down on you, all of a sudden you realize this God is much bigger than my likes or dislikes. You see, in our city, you'll hear people say things like, when I think of God, I like to imagine him as, I like to think of God as full of love and grace. Or you'll hear things like, I could never believe in a God who would send people to hell. The problem with that is that's not a glorious God, because it's a God you've made up. It's a God you've made up, right? And so when you begin to see God for who he is and his grandeur and his weightiness and his significance, you quickly begin to realize this is not about what I think, but instead it's about what he thinks of me. I need to know what he thinks of me because there's nothing beyond him. There's no one like him. You see, when you see God for who he is in all of his glory, you stop going to God for other things and you start going to God for God. I just need more of him. I just need more of him. Now again, let's keep reading as we close tonight because God's going to answer Moses on this request in verses 19 through 23. Let's look what he says. And he said, I will make all my goodness pass before you, and I will proclaim my name, the Lord. And I will be gracious to whom I'll be gracious, and I will show mercy to whom I will show mercy. But, he said, you cannot see my face, for a man shall not see me and live. And the Lord said, behold, there is a place by me where you shall stand on the rock. And when my glory passes by, I will put you in the cleft of the rock and cover you with my hand until I have passed by. And then I will take my hand away, and you shall see my back, but my face shall not be seen. Okay, so for all this talk about glory, and glory being our hope, and glory being what we need to sustain us, here in Exodus 33, all we get is the back. And that's crazy enough. Like the fact that God would even show that is bizarre and wild mercy and grace. But we get a lesser view. And it says, even getting this lesser view, Moses had to be hidden and to be protected lest he die. And so the glory of God is less about this bright light and brilliance that kind of passes around or whatever we might think of. He says that when my glory comes, it will be the proclamation of my name. Verse 19 says, I will proclaim my name. He says, I am the Lord. I am Yahweh. I am gracious. I'm compassionate. I'm merciful. And yet we also learn from Exodus 32, he will not leave the guilty unpunished. So he is merciful. He is gracious. He is compassionate. Yet he will not leave the guilty unpunished. And so this is why Moses has to be protected. And this is why no one can see the glory of God and still live. Why? Because every one of us stand guilty. Every one of us stand guilty. And so we see the back. And so God, it's true. He's unbelievably forgiving, but he's also punishing. It's true. God desires none should perish. But it's also true, he demands a payment for sin. You see the contradiction? You see the conflict? God is forgiving, but he's also punishing. He wants none to perish, but he demands a payment for sin. And so we feel this tension in us. We want to see God, but we know to see him would mean our utter ruin. So what do we do? This is what we need, but how do we see it? How do we behold it? How do we understand it? We see who we are in light of God, and we're left with attention. So what's the solution? If you have a Bible, go over to John chapter 1. Really fast, and we're done. John chapter 1. Look at verse 14. What's the solution? It says this, the Word became flesh. God himself became flesh. That's Jesus Christ. The Word became flesh, and he dwelt among us. And look at what it says. And we have seen his glory. Glory is of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. And so in Exodus 33, we only see the back of God's glory. We don't know how it's all going to work out. How can you be forgiving and yet punishing? How is that all going to work out? We only see the back. But here in John chapter 1, we see the fullness of God's glory in the face of Jesus Christ. And now it all comes together in a full panorama display. We see it. You can't see the glory of God or understand who he is without Jesus Christ, because what happens in him? God is absolutely forgiving. He sets his Son up as a sacrifice for your sins and my sins. He's absolutely forgiving, but he's also absolutely punishing. His Son really was slaughtered and really did receive a sacrifice. God really did consume sin, but not on you and me, on his own Son. And now we see it coming together. In Jesus Christ, the fullness of the glory of God, where mercy and justice, they meet. Mercy and justice, they meet. The blazing center of the wonder of God is found in the face of Jesus Christ. It's found in the face of Jesus Christ. And so this is why we say that his glory is our only hope, because it centers on Jesus, the one who resolves and solves our remedy. And so I want to end tonight by just asking a couple of questions as we've kind of tracked through the text. Where in your life have you been pursuing life as you want it, the way you want it, how you want it, when you want it? Where have you been pursuing life in those ways and been content? I can take or leave God. I just want my life. Where have you been doing that? Where in your life, maybe, Christian, have you been pursuing old pleasures again, still coming up dry and you're conflicted? Listen, aren't you exhausted yet? Aren't you exhausted? Where in your life have you been pursuing those things? And then finally, where in your life have you been content to have all of your life the way you want it and just a little bit of God, enough to make you feel good about yourself? Where have you been pursuing life the way you want it and a little bit of God to make yourself feel good about all of it. May God make us a people that would pray like Moses. God, show me your glory. If your presence isn't going to go with me, I don't want to go. If your presence isn't going to go with me, I don't want to go. But not just your presence, not just your blessing. Give me Jesus, God. In the midst of my stubbornness, in the midst of my proneness to wonder and doubt, just give me more of Jesus. Lord, show me your glory. Let's pray together. God, would you do just that tonight? We want to wrap up with the prayer that this passage pushes us to. God, would you show us tonight in this room your glory? That is no small prayer, God. That is going to mean beautiful things for us if you would show us. It'll mean beautiful things, but it'll also mean difficult realities of repentance and life change and giving up things we would rather hang on to, it seems. But God, if we don't have you, then we've missed it. Father, for my friends in the room, for those here tonight who are coming in cynical, who are coming in skeptical and doubting if any of this is even real, I pray by the power of your Spirit, you'd begin to stir something in them, that they would see the truth of who you are and the fullness of your goodness in the face of Jesus. That even if they've been wounded in the past, Jesus was also wounded and he understands. And he has the power to heal. He has the power to forgive. God, would you show us tonight that you have the power to restore us in our broken places? God, will we be a people who see the wonder and the beauty and the splendor and the truth that is in Jesus and be enamored by him? And would you help us come to the place where if you're not with us, then we don't want it. We love you, Jesus. Help us tonight. Stir us tonight. Change us tonight, we pray. In your strong name, amen. Church, let's stand and sing.